afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to this webinar series presented by Observer. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to our sponsor, Heritage Auctions, for making this event possible as well. My name is Juliet Helmke, and I'm Observer's Senior Editor of Arts and Culture. Our panelists are eager to answer all the viewers' questions, and you could submit those with the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer as many as possible. I'd like to introduce today's event, the last in our series, by thanking everyone who has made this online version of our Business of Art Conference a success. We had planned to host a live event today. That is not happening, as that is not happening around the world and the country. But in lieu of that, for the past 6 weeks, Observer has been hosting a series of free webinars focusing on different sectors of the art industry and sharing expertise and resources to do our part to reduce the effects of the pandemic on the arts industry. Earlier today, we welcomed a panel of arts communications professionals. Now, with this roundtable of accomplished guests with me, we are going to take a panoramic view of where the art market is and where it is going. So I'm joined by experts representing international fairs, art law, auctions, and galleries. We have with us Nicole Berry, who is the Executive Director of the Armory Show, John Cahill, a partner at Alsop Cahill Kosu LLP, and who is formerly of Sotheby's Auction House, Elyse Luray from Trust and Estates at Heritage Auctions in New York City, and Elena Soboleva, who's the Director of Online Sales for David Zwirner. So welcome, everyone. We're going to spend the majority of this conversation focused on actionable takeaways from each of your areas of expertise. But first, I'd like to quickly get a snapshot from each of you of what you feel has been the biggest change so far in your part of the industry, or what has been coming across your desk from mid-March to now. So let's start with Elyse.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having us. We are really honored to be sponsoring this, and I do hope that everybody out there is well and your families are well as well. So for Heritage, I would say that's really kind of a three-part answer for us. One is our sales have been incredible. Last week alone, we had $41 million just going on in 1 week in sales. We had a sports auction that did $12.5 million. Action has been happening a lot more action. We had a Babe Ruth baseball from 1921 that was estimated at $500,000 and sold for $950,000. So we're seeing a very big growth in sales. We're seeing a lot of people buying. We're seeing really strong prices. Heritage has always been one of the leaders on online sales. We probably were the leader for a very, very long time. So we have a lot of trust in our bidders. I think they feel really comfortable with our platform. We have an excellent platform. So that's really coming through in sales. So that's the first thing I would say is sales for us have been extremely strong. Number two, I would say that there's an increase in bidders. So in a normal weekly coin auction, we have about 12,000 bidders. Now we're seeing $24,000 bidders. And the interesting thing about that is we have our bidders that usually come for the weekly sales, but we're seeing new bidders. So while people are sitting at home, I can really tell that they're looking to bid, and we're finding new. And the third, private sales have really gone up in the luxury market. So for handbags, our handbag department has been extremely busy with people who are still interested in buying bags that are $100,000 bags or $20,000 bags. We sold a Lou Gehrig baseball bat for over $1 million. So really strong prices across the board for us. And I would say in those three categories of strong sales, new clients, and people who are interested in getting something right away, that's been a really strong effect for us for COVID. It's just been great. And I really attribute that to the trust that people have that Heritage has built a really strong online platform, and we have for a really long time.
Absolutely, that's such an important part of doing sales online, is having that trust there when people aren't able to actually come and see the objects themselves. Elena, over to you. What has been one of the biggest things coming across your desk in the past couple months since this started?
Well, it's obviously been an absolute whirlwind, but in some ways, I think that the greatest point for us has really been that we have been, forging ahead with online since 2017. And the first major gallery to establish an online viewing room, and even the fact that there was a team in place called Online Sales for already years. When this all happened, of course, it was a big change for us. All 6 of our galleries closed in the physical locations, but we were sort of incredibly well prepared. And that was, if anything, just shifted us to a point where instead of changing course, we just accelerated what we were already doing. And so for us, we had previously a pace of about 2 online exhibitions a month, which is equivalent to what we do with fairs, right about 20, 24 a year. And we went from, 2 a month to now having 12 online projects launching in 1 month. And that enormous acceleration has really been attributed to this incredible team that was already in place and now supported further. And has been wonderful to see this sort of complete group effort. In terms of the other change, of course, is really has been having artists paying more attention. And, we've been already doing projects with artists for the last couple of years, but all of a sudden, it's really been catalyzing in getting them to see the full extent of the space. And that's been very, very exciting from our point of view, because as we keep working with artists, that's really our that's really what we want that space to be there for them. And we want for them to really adapt and make it their own. And that has been very exciting, as that creates some completely sort of new and completely unique experiences. And so we've seen that happening rapidly. And to speak to Elyse, we've definitely seen amazing numbers, and great to say that, our last 5 online viewing rooms have sold out, and that's ranged from, $2,000 Marcel Zama to 1.8 million Joseph Albers. And so it's really run the full range.
Yeah, and that has been a massive change for the industry, and we'll jump into that a little more as well. Nicole, I wonder if you could answer that question for us.
A little different experience in that not having, well, we were very lucky to have just happened, and to have people in attendance, and then the world changed rapidly, as we all know. But for fairs, not being able to have people congregate is the biggest issue that we face. And so how, obviously there's been an online presence. For us, I would say March to now, the big issue is that our new venue, Javits Center, has been a field hospital. So thinking about, bigger picture things, and looking at how we can be of service to our community, to the arts community in New York City, and starting things online, such as Armory Access, which was an initiative that presented young galleries a platform similar to what David Zwirner was doing, but galleries that had been a part of the Presents program at the 2020 Armory. It's a very unique position to be in, to be the last fair to happen before sort of the world shut down. And so we've just been looking forward. We're also very lucky in that we have till September 2021 until our next fair is scheduled. So to take time to stop and assess the situation as it's constantly changing, and look at what other fairs are doing, and to be in communication with a lot of people. Usually during this time, in these past few months, we would have been traveling a great deal. And so to be able to take the time to have conversations, meaningful conversations about how can we impact the community, how can we help galleries, help artists, nonprofit organizations at this time, it's been incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And John, over to you. Oh, John, I think you are on mute right now. If you just want to unmute yourself, or if our tech could help with that.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So it's usually better when lawyers are muted, but for me, I can say that from my perch looking at the market, well, I think it's great that there are all these online sales, that the the market is considerably down, both in terms of volume of activity. And although we are seeing some major transactions, some 8-figure transactions, which is more than $10 million. And I think there has been a great acceleration for online sales from some of the auction houses and from Zwirner and folks like that. But I think there's little doubt that there are fewer transactions. And for lawyers, the transactions are harder. And in the art market, the transactions have always been harder a little bit because it's a difficult market in the sense that there's resistance to doing paperwork. It's not a culture, it's not a great legal culture, which generally is fine, because people are nice and they generally do the right thing. But when they, if you want to be careful when you're dealing with large transactions, or by which I would include things in the hundreds of thousands and even tens of the thousands of dollars, you have extra concerns. So you always have the concern: is this thing real? Am I going to own it? Do I have to pay tax on it? Which tax? If something goes wrong, which country, states, cities, law is going to govern? And you're seeing people struggling with that, in addition to the sort of practical realities of, can I see it? What if I don't see it? How do I deal with that? And I think people are being creative. I think we're trying to be creative. I think transactions are getting done, but it is harder. And what we're seeing a little bit of is some bad behavior and some good behavior. And we're trying to encourage people to engage in the good behavior and hopefully to raise the standards of the market a little bit. And I think we can see that with some more transparency. But we're generally seeing less volume, less transactions at high levels. Certainly the auction markets, although people are trying valiantly, and Heritage sounds like they're doing great. But for other auction houses, this is a challenge, even just on timing. When is the auction going to be? What happens if it doesn't happen? That kind of thing, if it's not a purely online auction. So that's what we're seeing.
Definitely. And I think let's continue talking about online sales right now, because it has been just one of the most, one of the biggest and most rapid changes taking place in the industry right now. So I want to pivot back to Elena. You touched on this a little bit, but my understanding, David Zwirner had started an online sales platform in 2017, and you came on board in 2018. And that was really seen as a major strategic move to treat the online space as an extension of the brick and mortar space, and to really to put some seriousness into online sales for what it could do and what it could be for the industry. So I'm curious to hear about what some of the challenges you faced were early on in getting started, and particularly what strategies you think might be helpful for those now who have had to quickly turn their focus to developing a digital strategy for the first time. We've seen a lot of galleries realize they had to cobble something together. So is there something that you can talk about in terms of strategy for them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. And I'd say that before I was with the gallery, I had been with Artsy. And so I spent a good deal of years trying in the early days and convincing galleries and auction houses then and everyone else in the art world that digital was the future in some ways. So that was something that was quite familiar to me, is to be taken skeptically and sort of get the art world on the side of digital. And so that was clearly a point when a gallery like that was already thinking about that so seriously, that really David and the partners and the whole gallery already had that in mind. And we're aware of the future shifting this way. And I think all of us were, who were planning for this. But with that, I think an important element had come in how you really position that online space. And for us, it really was never about sort of secondary inventory, the things that didn't sell. Really from the get-go, it was its own space. And that sort of fundamental, rather small seeming shift, but really made all the difference. And so how we think about having a gallery in London or Hong Kong, or when we opened a gallery in Paris, is never that, it would be secondary inventory that goes there. You still want to make that space feel its own and unique, and the artists come and respond to it. And very much in that way that the gallery started thinking about online. So whether we resourced it as such, having myself, having a team that works on it, how we approach artists to do this project is much like we would approach them to do an exhibition, where we show them the space, show them some of the examples, really let them respond to what they want to be doing there. And of course, also really making sure that what we presented were either, you know, really new, fresh to the market, exciting projects where they brought new inventory, new things that they've been thinking about or working on. Or we're making sure that it's, you know, significant and that collectors, you know, would find the same kind of works that they would find whether they go to a major art fair. And so we really started to explore all those sort of different parallel types of even online projects within the online space, and really for us treating it as its own space, as a standalone curated program was really important. And that sort of brings me to the current, and the sort of advice that I would sort of have for anyone right now is that really think about it from the point of view that you're not building a sales platform, which of course it should, you know, that's sort of the secondary function, but much like when you establish a gallery, it's really there to give your artists a space and to present culture. And so that sort of way of framing it allows you to really start to think about it, maybe sometimes as an publication, sometimes really with this contextual content side. It's also, of course, you know, in a time like this especially, I think everyone should be thinking about sales, but it makes you think about it in a broader way, where you're not just presenting sort of JPEGs in a grid, but you're really trying to build the narrative and the context. And then lastly, I would say with anyone new to online is really don't look at it for the limitations, because it will never be the physical space. And at the end of the day, we're a brick and mortar gallery, and we're not closing down our spaces and turning all operations online. At the end of the day, you know, we love looking and feeling and standing in front of the art, but really it's kind of this hybrid entity. And so you really have to think about where its strengths lie, and really play to the strength of online and what's unique about it, rather than trying to replicate what exists offline in the online space and falling short.
I have to say, I totally agree with you. The only thing that I would add is that I do think people need to feel a personal experience. I think, Elena, you're right. When they come there and they see this curated, great product that you're producing is great. But the sale, and I know you weren't really harping on the sales experience, but I do think the one thing that Heritage really tries to do, and I'm sure you try to do as well, is make people feel that they are walking into a gallery, even though they are online. If they want that personal attention, it is there for them. We're finding that a lot of people are reaching out, asking questions. Specialists are available. We're reaching out to people as much as we possibly can, so that, you know, I mean, we're not, you know, they come into this online platform, they don't feel that they're walking into space and there's no one there to guide them. That it's really important also to make each person feel special, and to feel that if they have a question or they don't understand something, that information is there for them as well.
That's a great point, and for sure. I mean, and you know what, everything from what I've seen, whether it's, you know, Zoom call tours, or your, you know, sales director walking you through while you're on the phone, to even how we set up sort of basically we have a front desk that functions for the online space 20 across all time zones, and so that if you inquire, you're able to immediately get a response. So I would say that's incredibly important.
And Elyse, you touched on this already, but it was something that we spoke about last week as well in our conversation with Mark Porter, the chairman of Christie's Americas. And he really emphasized, as you did, that established relationship and the trust that's forged between a collector and an advisor, a collector and a house that they frequently buy from, that can really help fill that gap of actually seeing the work when you're buying online, and how much more important trust is becoming, though it has always been a really important part of the equation. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask John a question about some of the legal factors that collectors should be aware of when they're buying online. So of course they have that trust there. Part of the difficulty is not being able to see the work, but what risks are heightened? And then conversely, how does digital buying also offer certain protections right now?
So the first thing I would say is that the trust is and ought to be there in most cases, but the other part of my living I have made in my long career has been suing people who haven't been trustworthy, who appear to be very trustworthy. So you always need to be careful. And the the things that you need to look for whether you're buying online or offline are very much the same, and in terms of making sure that it's what you think you're buying, which means if it's an original work, that it's original work. If it's an edition work, that it's part of the edition. Whether you're getting a good title, who are you buying from? And there are all kinds of new regulations in the UK, and to a lesser extent, but in terms of regulations, but legal issues that come with knowing who you're dealing with. Are you dealing with an advisor, dealing with people in the middle of the transaction? So making sure you're getting ownership of it. Value also becomes an issue, particularly in a time like this. Am I paying too much because it's a terrible pandemic crisis, or should I pay the pre-pandemic price because it's such a great work and it's hard to come by, or should I do that because this is what I think it's worth? Those things are difficult. In terms of condition, condition and shipping and things like that are probably the hardest things. And there are workarounds for that, even if you don't see it. But I have seen cases of people that predate the pandemic, that people are unhappy when they bought something off an iPhone and saw it for real. Sometimes justifiably unhappy, sometimes not justifiably unhappy. But with better technology and the right kind of words, you can wordsmith that. We have seen people buying things for spending a lot of money without actually seeing if they can be familiar and sort of having the right to get their money back if it doesn't work out and quote the right way. And I think Philips and maybe one or two others are giving the right to cancellation for certain online sales. So that's another way to do it. The other thing you need to watch out for, so in addition to who you're dealing with and whether they're trustworthy, and even people you think might be trustworthy, the Knoedler Gallery, for instance, was the oldest gallery in the United States at one time. Lots of people trusted them. We have $1 million judgment against a gallery with a famous art name that even before the pandemic, you can't afford it. So you don't know who you can trust in that sense. But you can get in online conditions and doing a transaction, you can get people to specify, and perhaps people are doing this a little more these days, what law applies, making sure you got the tax right. So you don't, remember, for people who don't know, that not paying your sales tax in New York is something that usually the district attorney gets involved in. So those are things that you can get done. But in general, I would say online sales are easier as a transaction, but you have to be careful when you're doing the point and click like I do when I'm on virtually every website. If you're buying something valuable, it's good to read the fine print, because the fine print matters. And most people do that at auction, by the way. They just raise their paddle and they're agreeing to the terms and conditions. So this is not something unfamiliar to the world. If you buy things at auction, you accept the condition as what's in a condition report. But the thing you can do is you can try and get more transparency from people because you're doing it online. And some people are doing that. And I think that's an opportunity for people to raise the standard and increase the level of trust that's out there.
Absolutely. And Elyse, you touched on this a little bit. I'm wondering if we could hear a little more about how the auction world has seen buyer habits shift. So at Heritage, have you seen a change in the type of work collectors are seeking out and bidding on? Is there stuff they're more interested in buying? And is there also, are there also auctions that you're just not feeling are performing as well online as they could in person?
Well, I would say, luckily for us, all across the board, our auctions in all the 40 different categories that we sell have been extremely strong right now. I will say this, we have seen a tremendous increase in the last year, or I would probably say maybe 2 years, in sports memorabilia, comic art, urban art, a lot of the collectible areas that we're so famous for selling. Usually also in a down market, on the stock market, our coins department does very well. People like to invest into metal. So we've always done very well. We are the leaders in coins, and we are seeing an increase in coins as well. Heritage also likes to try to seek out new markets. So this year we looked at, we started video games. We actually sold some Pokemon cards, and we had video games that were selling, over $10,000 to $20,000. So there is a lot of money in those areas. So we try to look for new markets to say, hey, this could become collectible, and this is fun, and these are new, things to look for. But definitely all across the board, we're doing pretty well.
And we have a question from an audience member as well. Are you, just a logistics thing, are you able to be shipping those objects out right now? How is that working? And if you're not, are people being understanding about that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So it's twofold. So right now, well, first of all, I should say Heritage is based in Dallas. So it's very different in Dallas right now than it is in New York. They are working, they are open. People are working on different shifts and they are socially distancing. So we are functioning in Dallas and we are able to ship in Dallas. So that hasn't been a problem. New York, a little bit of different situation, unfortunately. What I've done is there are a lot of people who have actually signed contracts already with me just by doing everything online. And I am sending them shipping material, packing material, FedEx labels. And if they're comfortable with that, then they can pack everything up and ship it out themselves. And we will arrange for FedEx to come and get it from them or for whatever carrier that we can use. So different parts of the country now, we are looking at different type of carriers that can come in and what the rules and regulations are, because so quickly, I mean, in March, we really couldn't do as much. And now here we are in May and a lot of the country is opening up and we can get into other places. I also have done a couple times where people have left their items outside and I've literally driven to their house and picked it up and put it in my car and driven it into our offices in New York. So it's really a case-by-case basis, but we are operational. I also should say that today I'm happy to announce that all of our furloughed employees are back in the office, all across,
fantastic news.
all across the country. So
yeah.
God bless all of them. I'm happy that they're back. We're thrilled that they're back, but we are that, because we're based in Dallas, our Chicago office has actually reopened this week as well. So we're doing pretty good. And we're trying to ship as much as we can.
And driving to people's houses to pick up work is such a great example of how the roles have shifted for so many people.
For sure. I'm now an art handler.
Yeah. And how people have had to be nimble and respond to just the changing nature of selling as well as exhibiting. I wanted to ask Elena a question about that. I'm really interested to hear how your artists have been reacting or adapting to the shift to not only selling online, but exhibiting on it. I mean, have you seen like excitement there, and how has the gallery been working with them to sort of harness that?
I think that's been one of the most exciting sort of evolutions, I would say, is before we were always kind of coming to them with ideas and they were responding to it. And all of a sudden it sort of started to roll in this way where this was the predominant exhibition space and suddenly they're coming to us furthering the ideas of what the online space could be. And the two examples there, we just recently did a project with Marcel Zama where he recently sort of, created a whole series of these beautiful, beautiful watercolor drawings responding to his travels. But it's something that was distinctly made already after the moment that things shut down. And I think this is what the unique opportunity, strange opportunity is, that while all of us are very much, in this kind of shifted gears, many artists are in their studios having this sort of opportunity to do what they did before, which is really, create and make art. And so what we're seeing is already sort of this next wave of art that's coming out of the studios that's incredibly strong and responsive and feels sort of urgent. And so, that was all a great example from a few weeks ago and really has been just an outstanding pleasure to work with, but he really started to design the whole, online experience. And then this week, taking that even a step further, we have Josh Smith, who's our artist, who's incredible painter, and he sort of created this whole concept how he wanted to do a show for an online space, but he wanted to do a show that's actually off-site. And so he proposed this idea that he stage a show on his rooftop of paintings that he's been doing. And so the show physically exists, but it's on his rooftop, and so no one can see it, of course, because of the social distancing and isolation. But even just that mental sort of, and conceptual gesture, he's, thinking about it very, very performatively and very strongly, that he is driving both curatorial and the vision for this, instead of us sort of giving artists a framework and them coming to us with that. And that has been one of the most exciting moments for me, really, to start seeing that happen more and more. And of course, the great thing is when one artist does it and then, others respond, and it becomes sort of very much a dialogue that develops.
Right. And I think that, we'll talk a little bit about sort of predictions, but I think we're going to see just the greater impact of this, in the future for galleries, for auctions, to have these online initiatives and to have sort of creative things happening online, as opposed to this sort of, sort of slap something up there that's just a reproduction of what what the work is. And that actually sort of brings me to Nicole, because obviously fairs are so much about the in-person experience. I mean, we've seen a lot of fairs have to create online iterations, and they've just done a really wonderful job trying to harness the excitement that someone might have going to a real fair. You have sort of been spared having to make that transition. Your next edition, as you mentioned, will be in the fall of 2021. So large scale events, we have a good amount of time for those to resume before that happens. But I'm curious to hear what, if any, strategic changes you might make going forward, particularly in relation to a greater digital presence. And also because I know you've been doing some online initiatives that you hadn't planned to do necessarily, but have come out of this experience in time.
Right. So I had referenced Armory Access earlier. Armory Access is a dedicated page on our website that hosts exhibitions from our Presents galleries. We wanted to do something immediately in the week following the fair, when things drastically changed, to help galleries that didn't necessarily have the resources of a Zwirner or a Pace. So we put that together, reached out to the galleries. It's very democratic. It's first come, first served basis, and the response has been fantastic. So some sales have happened. Definitely, it's not just about the sales, as we were talking about earlier. It's about the fact that those galleries had these, you spend so much time as a gallerist working on an exhibition. And so then to not have any traffic and not be seen, we really wanted to help them in that way. And it seems to be working out well. We've actually had galleries from other sections of the fair reach out and say, when do we get our chance? So that's been really rewarding, and something that was not planned and will continue long after people are able to go back into galleries, as they already are in Berlin and Paris. It's an initiative that we've had such good response with that we want to continue that moving forward. The other thing that we've been able to do is, and this is all, again, based on those conversations that I said I was now having the time to have these really deep, meaningful conversations with curators and gallerists and artists. Our Curatorial Leadership Summit, which only happens at the fair during those 5 days of the fair, has now moved to a virtual Curatorial Leadership Summit. So we had a curator reach out to our chair, Jose Diaz, and say, I'm feeling very isolated. And even though I'm having Zoom calls, I have questions for my peers. Is this something, is this something I should be worried about? What do you think about this? And so we had 85 participants for our first discussion. And so it was a closed door, just like the closed door discussion that happens at the fair, a closed door discussion to discuss relevant topics, concerns, issues. And then last week we had Sally Talent and Sahanya Rafael in discussion for anyone who wanted to join, which also came about as from the Curatorial Summit discussions. How do institutions move forward? Looking at somebody who's in the heart, the epicenter in Queens versus Hong Kong, where Sahanya's had to open, close, reopen. And so what does that look like once you are moving forward? So being able to have those discussions and have those conversations, now having the Curatorial Leadership Summit is something that is going to be year round, is a wonderful addition to the fair, and I think very beneficial to people in the industry, just as you guys are doing. I think the more that we can have these conversations and talk to our peers that we might not normally get a chance to talk to, the better off we'll be moving forward, because no one has the answers. So will September 2021 be, will it be ready for, will everything be solved by then? Certainly not, because it's never going to go back to what it was. So that new normal, we're constantly looking at day to day, everything is changing very quickly. So we're monitoring the situation. We're looking at what other fairs are doing. We're getting feedback from galleries. I have no doubt that we'll have some sort of a digital presence during the physical fair, It won't replace it, certainly, because I feel strongly that we still need that human interaction. This is a business that's based on relationships, as you guys said earlier, the trust that you have with a client and a gallerist or an advisor. So I feel strongly that we will have a physical edition of the fair, but supplemented by some sort of digital that we don't know what that is yet. We're an experiential digital, as we were talking about, making people feel special, giving them, the VIP treatment. How will that manifest itself? Time will tell, and we're working on all of that as we speak.
Well, we're excited to see how that sort of rolls out and into the future. I think touching on that point where, you really responded to something that you were hearing from your colleagues, from people who had been involved in the most recent edition of the fair. We're seeing a lot of that happen right now, and it's been so wonderful. We've seen so much of this willingness of different entities, different parts of the industries, even perhaps people who, would have called each other competitors, coming together to collaborate and problem solve right now. I wanted to chat with Elena really quickly, because one very notable initiative that came out very early on was when David Zwirner announced Platform New York. So rather than me explain what that is, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about it and just some insight into how that came together, because it really was very quick, and it was one of those first initiatives that made people feel like we are in this together.
Absolutely. So the initiative that you mentioned is called Platform, and we have had so far 3 editions of it, starting in New York, then London, LA, and this week we'll be actually opening Paris, Brussels edition. As you observed, and mentioned, we really had this sort of team and resources in place, and we're doing already online projects. And when all of this sort of shifted so quickly at the start of March, all of us sort of, were really looking for a meaningful way to respond. And of course, everyone was just talking to their friends, their colleagues, neighbors. I'm in the Lower East Side right now still, so very much in that sort of young gallery neighborhood. And so what happened was the younger team members of our gallery really sort of came up with this idea that was just so sort of obvious, and we were able to immediately put that into motion, which is to really bring people who are our friends, colleagues, and sort of neighbors, and give them the space, give them the platform and visibility. Because one thing that we knew is that we had already up to that point worked for years and developed a strong online audience, all of the sort of both resources and the structure and framework for how one could present our work of artists online. And by being able to share that resource, it was just something that was really organic and obvious to the whole team, and sort of started to evolve very naturally. So when we started, it was just an effort in New York, and then it was sort of so successful. And we had not only sales of the works that were listed, we then started to actually switch out the works and had people coming to the gallery's websites and inquiring. And I think so far in the 3 editions, because the 4th one is not launched yet, we've had over $1 million of sales for these galleries generated. And of course, this is very anecdotal, because we don't require anyone to come back to us with any numbers. We really pass along all the clients, and it's just been amazing because they've been appreciative and have shared some of that so that we can have some numbers to share. But really shows how much stronger we are as a collective entity, and really sort of uniting the art world, and sort of all of that. Then right now it's the time to come together. And I think not only do our artists and collectors appreciate that, but if we want to come out of this with a stronger and better art world, this is what one needs to do. And as well, I think it's really also highlights the fact that while in the past it's been sort of a competitive industry, right now we know that we sort of all need to be in this together to really sort of survive. And our collectors are really appreciative of that. They really sort of value the sense of discovery they've been able to have. And I know that we feel so, just amazing to have been able to start something that now has sort of a life of its own and is continuing it in this way.
I have to tell you, I love you. I think your platforms are brilliant, and I thank God. They're good for you that you've done that. They're great.
Thank you. And I mean, you know, it's sort of, in some ways, it's a very focused effort, because obviously we could only do what the resources of our team currently, you know, were able to do, which is why the number 12, it was something that, you know, our team could put together in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's not a master plan. It was this kind of very organic, very much, you know, effort that we just from the ground up.
You know, it's funny because we don't have a platform like that, but in the same kind of vein, Heritage was approached by Don Henley from the Eagles, and he had written out the lyrics for Desperado. So we were kind of looking for a way to give back as well, and think, how can we give back? So we worked with the Texas Food Bank, and he was willing to donate a couple pieces. And then we were able to say, hey, we have this connection. Anybody else want to donate for us? And kind of trying to do the same thing, going to celebrities and some other people and saying, would you donate? We held our first auction where we were able to feed over 100,000 lunches to people in Texas. And with that success, we then went to Kogogan Tate, who obviously are shippers, and said, hey, let's collaborate together. What could we do? We're now putting together a sale as well. We don't have as much access to artists like you do from an intellectual point of view, but we do have collectors and people that are out there. So we got a beautiful Wiley painting and a Nakashima piece of furniture that we're selling, and we have some really nice pieces. So kind of similar, but a little different. We have been reaching out to consigners and to collectors to try to find their objects. They're already created, and then give it back to charity.
And I think that sort of collaboration is going to be very important moving forward as the arts tries to reopen. You know, in New York right now, we're categorized as phase 4, meaning the last sort of entity that can start to reopen, and that might be something that will shift if things like museums can prove that they should be included in phase 3. But it is a concern right now, and we are really feeling that people want to make sure that they are coming together across the sectors of the industry. I do want to move on to talking about physical sales, but just quickly, I was wondering if one or two of you or a couple of you might want to weigh in on who do you see in the industry right now that might be in most need of that help from their industry partners, whether that's nonprofits or artists or the smaller galleries.
Well, I think almost everyone is, from smaller galleries to the medium-sized, even larger galleries. Museums are really hard hit. Smaller nonprofits. You know, one of the things we're doing is a pro bono case for charities that were hurt by Panel 8 not paying it. I think everyone needs help, even a decent-sized gallery. All that space, all that stuff costs huge amounts of money, and I think people, you know, need to try and be in the market as much as they can and supporting one another, you know, financially if they can. And people need to be creative. You know, banks are lending money. People are buying and selling if you can do it well. And of course, artists, who are the foundation, or those folks are, depending on who they are, Jasper Johns is probably okay, but other artists, even at good-sized galleries, are not getting the same kind of income that they were getting. Again, there are exceptions to that, you know, good exceptions, and there should be. But right now, it is a huge crisis in the nonprofit and the museum world. And by the museum world, I don't just mean small museums, small regional museums. I mean large museums that are really in trouble. And I think we need to support them and support what they do, even if in better times we would hope they wouldn't have to do those kinds of things. And the same thing is true with galleries and artists. People can be patient and creative. I think that would be helpful. But just about it's great to hear that there people are making sales, but my sense is, with some real data, is that the market is really hurting, and that will, you know, I was around in 2008 and 1991, and I've seen lots of mini recessions. Things get hard. Things get hard for everyone who has to pay their rents and pay salaries. It gets very hard. So people need to be as supportive as they can.
Absolutely. Looking at physical sales, I do want to look at the future of physical sales, but just to go back a little bit, I think that we can really learn a lot from what Nicole went through with the most recent edition of the Armory show, launching it while we were struggling day to day to grasp how this was going to be affecting New York. So it ran as planned in early March. You followed all of the proper guidelines and recommendations being made by the health departments and governmental officials. At the fair, it was a constant topic of conversation. It also, of course, had an impact on who was attending. And, you know, a lot of galleries in China and other nations that reported early cases, their participation changed. I wonder if you could talk to us about what impact that had on sales and what advice you would give to leaders of events like yours in the future when contemplating whether or not to move forward with a large scale event.
I mean, we were incredibly lucky. Had we happened a week later, we wouldn't have happened. We were monitoring state guidelines, everything. And we did follow the best practices that were put in place with our hand sanitizer stations and all of that. Luckily, yes, there were some people who didn't come, which actually now that there are conversations, there's an interesting article by Dan Hugh in today's ArtNet about fairs that are more regional might become even more successful than some of the big international fairs. We have the benefit of being in a global, you know, destination, New York City, and having an international fair with people from all around the world coming to participate, but also people coming to see what we're doing and visit the fair, but also an incredible local collector base who supports, and regional, you know, tri-state area collector base who come and support the fair. And our major collectors or just getting started. So I think we were really lucky. There were people at the fair who sold out their booths. You know, you're never going to have everybody sell out their booths, which is an ideal situation for a fair producer. But we were overwhelmingly pleased with not only the sales, but the attendance at the fair and good big collectors. It wasn't just filling the aisles with people. We just did what we thought was best with the information that we had. And at that time, you look at hindsight's 2020, of course, you looked at the very few people who had masks on at the fair. And that was kind of like, they seem to be going overboard. And now here we are where we have to wear masks in New York. That's what's required. So when you have more, you deal with the information that you have. I think moving forward for organizers of not just fairs, but I've been in conversation with people who, from Madison Square Garden, you know, anybody that's doing a big event, you have to factor in a lot of things. It's not just about the congregation at that event, it's about the transportation to it. Or will people feel safe to take the subway? But for us, communication was key. Communication with our exhibitors, communication with our visitors, and knowing that you're never going to make everyone happy with the decisions that you make. Someone's always going to feel like, oh, that was the wrong decision. And actually, in one of our communications right before the fair opened, I had people from the East Coast saying, you know, are you sure you're doing enough? And people on the West Coast who said, you're being an alarmist. Why are you sending the exhibitors this email? Because you're trying to meet in the middle. You're trying to make sure that everyone who participates in your fair is safe and everyone who is visiting your fair is safe. So you're doing the very best practices. And I think those best practices will continue. They'll continue to be hand sanitizer. We'll now have to wear masks at events. But as I said, we're very lucky having that time period that hopefully physical fairs will be happening or physical events will be happening. We'll just have a different, you know, the VIP day will be longer and it'll be timed sections. Those are things that we're discussing. How do we move forward with that? But I think it's a difficult decision to make. I think more difficult now for people than the decision I had to make, because for us, we were already a moving train that was going, and unless it was a really serious situation at the time the fair opened, which it wasn't in New York City. New York City was still very much just going ahead as always. But now with the information that we have, people who are working on fairs need to be making really tough decisions. But I do think that there will be a strong regional presence, and we're lucky to have our regional support. of galleries, of collectors, partnerships with institutions, because it'll be a while before people feel comfortable getting on a plane and traveling anywhere, let alone to go to an art fair.
Definitely. I've got one more for Elena, and then we'll take one or two audience questions. So Elena, I wanted to ask about, because Elyse has also touched on this a little as well, with Heritage being in Dallas and how they've been able to start looking at reopening certain services. How is David Zwirner, particularly given that, you know, I know you have galleries all over the world, but being in New York City with a flagship there, how are you strategically approaching the possibility of reopening when the timeline is so uncertain right now?
Well, as you mentioned, you know, I think we have sort of galleries all over the world. And so what we've really been thinking about is that we can't really predict the future and what happens here in New York. And we are sort of obviously fortunate enough to be able to move our sort of operations and sales and exhibition into, to the extent that, you know, we can, into the online realm. However, we also have a space in Hong Kong, and that space closed in the third week of January. So that was quite in advance of when things here in New York were happening and closing down. So that gave us sort of something where we knew the protocols, we knew the procedures in a large way as some of this, you know, happened. And so our space in Hong Kong, I'm happy to report, has actually reopened at the start of this month. It's by appointment only, but already that's such a hopeful sign there. And so we are looking to that. We are excited that, you know, our Paris space is actually going to be reopening at the end of this week as things, you know, again, get to a little bit more normal there. And so while we can't predict what's happening in New York, we are as well, you know, sort of listening and following all best guidelines. We are very, very much looking to those locations, and, you know, optimistic that already it's great signs that around the world things are starting to ease up and get back to what obviously is very much a new normal. And so it's interesting because listening to Nicole, I was thinking, you know, does this mean that fairs will be longer because it's going to be like smaller time slots? Of course, you know, I think for galleries, we're going to have to rethink travel and openings and all of that. But the nature of exhibitions, thankfully, remains such that for the most part, that, you know, you can come and see the work and be still quite distant from other people.
Absolutely. So we have a question here from Julia Hernandez, who touches on an interesting point in terms of the barrier accessibility of buying online. So she says, I know for some art categories, the clientele is older and used to more traditional modes of buying art. Have you seen a discrepancy between the age ranges adapting to the online platforms, or has it been up or down across the board?
We really haven't. I mean, I think Heritage has been doing online auctions for a really long time. So if somebody is uncomfortable with bidding online, we would probably walk them through that, teach them how to do it. I haven't, in the last couple of years, I really haven't seen that much of a discrepancy at all. I mean, obviously the younger generation, it's very easy for them, but I think most people have smartphones at this point. Most people are buying on Amazon Prime. Most people are really at this day and age using online sales as part of the norm for their regular life. So again, it's that trust factor, and it's that we've been doing it for so long, but I would say in our 40 categories, it's pretty across the board. You know, most of our auctions these days, and I know it's a little bit different for a gallery, but at Heritage, all of our sales, most of the buying always comes from online anyway. Very few people, you know, are in the auction gallery unless it's a really big sale that is more of a higher end or a spectacle. Most of our buying is really coming even in the $1 million range and higher. We've been selling $1 million items for a very long time online. So people are really used to it.
And we have a question here about condition reports that I think is sort of interesting. Obviously, that's an important factor of buying anything. But people are wondering, we had one question about, do you think that more detailed condition reports will be required by clients? And then beyond that, could this also sort of affect the importance of it in terms of the detail that might be acceptable within a condition report moving forward?
Again, for us, I think it depends on the category. Certain categories that we sell things are graded, or they are already they are graded. The photographs, and Lena, you probably agree with this already as well, are so detailed right now that you can really get a good sense of what something in condition-wise just by looking at the detailed photographs that are on the site. There are condition reports on site. I can't answer it from John's point from a legal point of view, but again, experts and specialists are readily available. If they ask for something else, we're happy to give it to them. So I've always thought condition reports were important, especially when it's collectibles or artwork that needs to have a black light, or collectibles where half the value could just really honestly be the condition of the piece. So we've been doing really detailed condition reports forever, and I'm sure as the industry changes and more people go online, if they ask for more things, we're happy to give it to them. So for us, it's pretty much industry standard, and we'll keep giving them as much as they can. But I think when you go online and you see how well everything is documented and photographed, that people will be pretty happy.
Absolutely. And the last one is a little bit of just looking forward. I know that we don't really have all that much time here, but if anybody wants to give us a bit of 1 month, 6 months, a year from now, a big takeaway that the industry, or perhaps just your sector of the industry, will have learned from this moment in time, we'd love to hear any thoughts on that.
I mean, for us, I think the digital was always something, because we're a physical entity that is a short period of time, we were very focused on the physical. And though Art Basel and Frieze were working on online fairs before they had to cancel their fairs and move to a completely online platform, I think embracing the digital, much like Elena was saying, this is something that is inevitable. And so how we can embrace that, look at the different ways of using it that haven't been used yet, because as successful as the online fairs have been so far, there's room to grow. There's so many other more interactive, experiential things that could happen with time. And so I'm hopeful that we're able to create something even stronger, even more is supplemental to the physical experience of the fair. So that's something that I'm looking forward to as a fair producer.
And to add, I saw a question from Elaine come in about three-dimensional, and I think that's actually sort of something I would point to in the future. And I have to say, we just launched our first project within that space on Friday, actually collaboratively with Victoria Moreau Gallery, powered by Vortic. But generally, I see that as a huge shift, and one that's sort of so self-evident that it's sort of not even in some ways, doesn't sound futuristic to talk about. But right now we just all assume that when you sell an artwork, you get a few JPEGs. Maybe you get the install view, you get a couple detail views. Maybe someone sends you an iPhone video, to get that. But as, storage capacity increases, as obviously speeds increase, that 5G comes in, we're just going to continuously rely on getting sort of the full 3D file. So, I think already thinking about how you're going to photograph all your objects, all your works in 3 dimension. And of course, for sculptures, that's the most relevant, and sort of thinking about that. But even for paintings that have dimensionality or reflection, that actually becomes an element. Because think about it, a metallic chrysophyll, if you actually don't photograph it in 3D, you'll never be able to capture the sheen that it has when you move around the space. And so one of the most exciting things that I sort of have been working on recently that just launched has been this collaborative project, and certainly to Elaine's point, and as well with the sort of future holds, see that more galleries, museums, other institutions will be bringing more 3D and virtual renderings to really be able to experience the work in a deeper and fuller dimension.
Yeah, Heritage is already working on virtual viewings, and virtual galleries. So when we hold viewings now, similar to what Nicole was saying about art fairs, we will be having virtual viewings as well. So if you can't come and see the viewings, we'll be bringing them to you as well.
And it's really interesting because I think that there is sort of, it has to be to a point where the lighting and everything has to be like good enough that it doesn't put you off. Because of course, if it's sort of halfway there, it has the opposite effect. It makes you feel less connected to the object. It has this kind of uncanny valley. But when you get to a point where it can be almost as good as the image, you know, that's when we really are going to start to see that being used and utilized as a tool.
The production value of actually documenting these works could be a big shift that we see in future.
The works and the spaces. And of course, again, it's not going to replace the, you know, ever the feeling of standing in front of a physical work, but maybe you're not going to be shipping, you know, large sculptures across the world just to have one client view it.
Mm-hmm. John, is there anyone?
I think you're going to see more and better tech, more online sales, more private sales. But I don't think you'll see the liquidity and the fluidity of the market, which until the auctions are back, and particularly at the high end, that means something physical. Juice is flowing in the room. It's art market. People are social animals. And I think we don't have a stock market. So that's the best thing we have as a price reference point. And until that comes back, I think there's always going to be a little softness in the market.
I think that's true. And I look forward to seeing you all at one of those live events sometime in the future. For the time being, thank you for everything that you're all contributing to the health and wellness of the industry right now. I really appreciate having you join me today, and to all of our viewers as well. This actually concludes the spring edition of the Business of Art webinar series. If you want to stay up to date on what we're doing and any future events that we're planning, head to businessofart.observer.com. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.